So once again, it's a pleasure to welcome Paula Lobos in Chile onto the Awareness Day. Paula joined us last year as part of one of the group conversations, and we have just had a connection, she and I, that I think is really important. And part of Paula being here today is to talk about the work that she's doing in Chile. So Paula, I want to give you a moment to introduce yourself and tell us what you're up to in Chile.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, for inviting us again. I'm really pleased of being able to participate in this awareness time, that I think we really need it. So as an introduction of myself, I'm a psychologist and a teacher for learning disabilities as well. I work for an NGO that is called Paikavi, and we work with children that have been affected by serious uh, children's right, serious situations where we work with sexual abusive practices displayed by children, sexual exploitation. So our NGO work in this way to try to protect them and help them to move on. And that is the way that we do. And there I work as a kind of a supervisor. It will be the idea of different centers that work with it. We have around 27 centers around our country, and we do that work. It's a very kind of a specialized work to help them to move on.
So you supervise all the centers and the practices of those centers and stuff?
No, we are three supervisors, and we split the centers, and we go there and support all of the practitioners and the professionals that are doing the work. And I have done it myself in the past, but the years go through, so I'm now in another role.
Yeah, and so you're supporting those who are delivering the services. So therefore, you're also involved then in the development of the training and the development of the models of care, which is what we want to talk about today, right? We one model in particular, and one part of your model in particular that you and I spoke about the other day that I just thought, oh my God, this needs to be part of the Awareness Day to help people understand different ways of looking at sibling sexual abuse in particular. So that we are helping society as a whole and parents and other people as well to understand that there is a lot of information that people don't have about how these behaviors are perceived, and how they're managed, and what can be done to prevent sibling sexual abusive behaviors, and also how to intervene appropriately. So tell us about the model. Tell us, what is it for? Why was it developed? What's behind the model? And then we'll go into the model, what it looks like. We'll draw it in people's heads.
Well, years ago, around 2007, we were practitioners as well, working with these children and young people that displayed harmful sexual behavior towards other young people and children and adults as well. And we were thinking, trying to explain ourselves their behavior, and we found that there were a lot of explanations that were based in the adult models of predators and sexual abuse, and we realized that model wasn't helpful for us to understand what children displayed. And then with the years, we understood as well there is a significant numbers of children that display this sexual abuse. But at the time, we started to realize that there was a lot of the situations that were based in kind of dimensions that we could understand or develop some hypotheses about their behavior and their responsibilities. We were not trying to find for them to, you recognize your responsibility about this, but to try to understand the factors that can be, at the base of this behavior and this type of practices. We start to develop a way of thinking when we start to think about them as something that they have practiced because of what they were saying to us. They were developing with us, the team that were around, something that currently we can call like epistemic trust. a capacity for them to trust us, to tell us their things, you know. And that was developed in a way when we developed some kind of unconditional acceptance of them and their behavior. And we were not judgmental, but to try to understand together and help them as well to process what they have done, you know. And we realized with them that some of them, I never worked with one of them that were having been sexual abused themselves as well in different ways, but also some of them will be secret, will remain in secrecy, you know, in terms of what happened to them, something that was really difficult for them to say. A lot of embarrassment as well about the behavior that they have had, and some of them in a great denial. So you will find different types of. And then we started to realize that at the base of this it was a lot of things that are contextual. For example, the society issues like really access internet, all type of content in the internet, you know, that was available for them without any, you know, real support of the adults in charge of them. No sexual education at all, not legal education at all. Like they don't know, they are kind of exploring with the things that they learn. Some of them that suffer sexual abuse as well themselves by people outside in the community, by other peers as well, by their brothers, older brothers as well, and sister or cousins, or a lot of people, you know, neighbors, etc. And so you start to realize that a lot of these factors were in place. Alongside that, you will find a type of family that display different types of attachment to them, where the affectivity is also something that was in the evaluation. You will see some types of affectivity going on, lack of boundaries in some families, in some other lack of expression of love at all, no connection, no sensitivity of the carer. So we start to realize, is this affecting them? Is this doing something to them? And then we found their own factors. They were growing, they were young, they were not knowing, they were not really well prepared. They were having some jealousy towards the brothers or sisters that were receiving the love, for example, while others where they were not. But also some of them were placed as really in a very important position within the home, without no boundaries and no respect toward the other siblings as well. So a lot of issues around power, but around society power, family power, and the power that they learned. So we realized that it was like a triangle, where the base of this triangle, which is the society issues, was really, really bad. And then the family issues were as well, with a lot of things that we needed to cover to change the behavior of the young person, to stop doing something, and a lot of factors, some of them really, really traumatized by that experience that they have never said. And when they say it to us, it was like really an impact, because then you can kind of understand that they were mirroring or mimicking or bringing in a way as a communication the aggressiveness or the type of behavior that they display towards other as a manifestation of damage of themselves, how they were damaged by their own histories, you know. So we always found something that could explain in some ways their level of responsibility. So, but we knew as well, we couldn't take the responsibility that they have done already. You know, they did it. And this has an impact towards the victim. So we couldn't as well have an approach in terms of responsibility where we said, no, they have no responsibility, because that's not true, you know. But we started to display that we needed to establish some kind of level of responsibilities as an approach to work with. So we started to work with the families, explaining how much the society didn't help very much to what happened with the child, then what was happening with them that didn't help the child at all, and then with the responsibility of the child alongside with their victimization issues. We needed to address both things because of their ages. We needed to address the individual responsibility as well as their victimizations too. That's why we will call the three-dimension responsibility model.
And it just to reiterate, it sort of looks like a triangle with the
Yes,
sort of societal context on the bottom, the
exactly.
interpersonal within the family context in the middle, and then the intrapersonal, so the relationship one has with oneself and how things have impacted a person and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose in there we all also fits in there the physiological side of things, like brain development stages and things like that, that are
Exactly.
only within that person. And so therefore,
Exactly.
because like, and the reason why I like this visual so much is because A, it's really simple for people to see how sibling sexual abuse can happen in a context. When we look at the context, we can find not, I don't like to use words explanations or reasons, but we can find influences at the different levels of context. And in other parts of the Awareness Day content blocks this year and in my podcast and everything, so many people who work with youths who are either causing harm or who have been harmed, when you really listen to what you're being told as an adult professional or academic, you are always hearing context. You're always hearing other influencing factors. And when models appreciate those factors, I think you're developing something that can be quite helpful in terms of the work that you do with regard to intervention. But then it also, to me, makes the conversation about prevention also have that model. So if you overlap that same model and talk about it in a preventative way, and then it's sort of like, okay, well, what can society do, for example? How can we minimize the influences or the context that may be created at a societal level? So society, you and I have talked about this off camera. Society is very accepting of hard and soft porn all over the place, not realizing or not really, you kind of say, oh yeah, it must be affecting the kids, but not really understanding that it's really affecting children. And we're seeing more and more and more of that, where children are so adversely affected, not only to the point where they might demonstrate abusive behaviors, but girls in particular who have even lower levels of self-esteem or lower levels of understanding of what a sexual relationship should be like. So, when they're 13 years old and they've been exposed to porn just in an innocent kind of way, quote unquote, they've got this really screwed up illusion of what these relationships are supposed to be like. So, again, in a preventative way, the bottom part of that triangle, society has a role here. In the media we produce, in the media we tolerate, in the language that we use in society, and the behaviors that society tolerates. I often sit back and wonder, why aren't people getting up in arms about these sorts of things? Because if I was saying that let's be really conservative about numbers of sibling sexual abuse, and let's go for the 2% of children. Okay, let's be really super conservative and go for 2%.
Yes, yes,
Well,
yes,
if
yes.
2% of children were by the time they were, say, 12 years old, and this is might be a bad analogy, but by the time they're, say, 12 years old, they have a heart condition, they
Mm,
have bad heart health. Well, society would want to be doing something to change that. But in this conversation, society just turns its head and walks away and allows all sorts of stuff. So that there, in a preventative way, in that part of the model, the society fits in there. And then, of course, you've got that middle piece of the family context. How can we, in a preventative mindset, support parents? And as you were saying, understanding theories of attachment, understanding that connecting with your child can sometimes just be looking at them when they're talking and smiling and really hearing them. So it's not, it's not 4 hours a day of intensive, training and all that sort of stuff. It's just smiling at your kids when they're talking, these sorts of things. That's one of the reasons I love that model, because it's an intervention model for sure. And it's that prevention models as well. And it's something
mhm,
that people can easily get their head around, I think. Now
mhm,
you've I know you have stories, and of course, there's lots of confidentiality and things like that. But in terms of the evidence that you have in the work that's been going on, what would you say are the parts of your model that make it successful? What for you makes that model work well?
I think the model as well require a team that understand the complexity needs to be managed as a team, because when the cases are very complex, you cannot hold them by your own self, but as an individual. You need a team to work within. And that time we have psychosocial teams. So we have a social worker alongside with a psychologists working toward this, but also we understand that we need to work with the other agencies and services. So it means that means that we are responsible to help other people to understand how to approach this, because it's not something that is not useful if I'm the only one that I'm thinking about this in this way, because the child will have different types of consequences. So we needed to have different layers of the work. Some of the work will mean that we need to go to schools or schools that they are in and do a type of work that the school is willing to do as well with us. And we need to influence different places. We need to be able to influence the schools. We need to be able to influence the families. So that first understanding is that complexity, as a summary, complexity is based in a type of team that will support these with the understanding in their mind that we need to work in layers, like in levels. And you need to display that type of work, which it will be different if we think, oh, this is a clinical work. Let's go to the child, let's fix the child, and that's it. No, that wouldn't work with us. It wouldn't.
No.
It's not that cannot be useful. For example, if the child is 17, probably he will need to cope with his life and just be adult, and we need to move on. So we will have different approach depending the age. But if a child has 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, you know that you are in a critical period and you can do a massive change, and that it is important, and it will do a change. Because if not, you will have, like the statistics, you can have a number of children that have displayed this type of behavior that wouldn't repeat it in the future. They will never tell, but they will need to dissociate the rest of their lives, because they wouldn't be able to say, I didn't. So they deny it. They wouldn't do it again. They know in their minds that they will not do it again, but because of the consequences of the law, they are like in a prison forever to
Yep.
tell. They cannot tell it, because if they do, we need to make all the things that we need to do.
Yep.
And with some of them, you can kind of work it out through for them to be able to face that, but it will depend on the balance of these things. So I think that what it make it work is that the teams are willing as well, as a second thing, to display a more kind of complex understanding. So develop comprehensive hypotheses of work. There always it will be always a hypothesis, and you will be checking with the young person, you will be checking with the family, you will be checking with the system. So you have all these model, the systemic model of approach at the same time. But also I will say that I have discovered as well that a capacity of the practitioner, it will be something that now we understand better, which is called this capacity of mentalize or mentalization, which is a way of understanding the mind of other person and your own mind and the impact of the behavior of the other person has in yourselves. So I understood with the time, and I would love someday to write about that as well, but I have no time to do it. But within the time, I did understand that the first session with the young person, it was very important to develop epistemic trust, for
Yeah.
them to be able to see that we were able to mentalize them, to produce a relief in terms of, I'm not going to judge you. I'm gonna, be for you there, even though if you tell me the worst things that you imagine that are the worst thing that I could ever have imagined, not gonna think that you are a diamond, or whatever, no? But as well as, I'm going to give you time. I'm here available for you. I'm a safer space. If you would like someday to tell me for you not to live in spaces inside of you. I will believe you, and I will help you to see if the people that maybe you think that they won't stop love you and you will lose everything, if they
Yeah.
will want to continue loving you, I will try to help you with that. So it was a way to mentalize their experience as well of suffering, and their experience as well of ambivalence, and the experience of showing themselves not as perfect persons, but as aggressors, but at the same time be able to sustain what they have suffered or the victimization that they have suffered as well. So it's a complex thing that you need to have the whole time in your mind, both things, the victim and the aggressor at the same time. The aggressor, I don't like to say it like that. Sorry that I say it like that. It's more the person that have displayed this aggression, because it's not what they tried is, you know.
Yeah.
It's developed
It's
their
about the
identity.
behaviors.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
have a responsibility in the development of their identity. Will you want them to be developed as their identity as an aggressor, or you will like for the society, for himself as well as if he's right, to develop as a person that displays something that was very wrong, and he can move on. Recently, I have a supervision of one of the teams, and one of the young persons suffer really greatly because another issue that happens in his family, and he was willing to accept some of the mistake that his family did. And one of the things that he said to the professional, it was, you know, I have made my mistakes and I'm really regretful about that. So I would like to give this person a second chance as well, because I think everyone deserves a second chance. And you think, wow, you know, everyone deserves a
everyone does deserve a second chance, and that reminds me of a story of somebody I know who, in listening to me and the work that I do as siblings too, this happened in her family, not to her, but to another important member of her family who are now adults. And she said to me that she now has empathy for the relative who caused harm to the other relative as a boy. So she empathizes with him when he was a boy and he made all these really terrible decisions. And I think, you know, I never want to sound like we're ever disregarding the survivor, because we're not. The survivors sort of the top priority, their safety, their mental well-being, all of that sort of stuff. But I and the SiblingsToo project in particular really want to understand the person who's causing harm. What are those factors? What is that triangle? You know, what is it that's where is this taking place? What is the context? There's no doubt that some people, some young people, are what I often refer to as a quote unquote predator in training. So these are people who will not demonstrate remorse. They will not demonstrate guilt, and they are potentially dangerous to society. I mean, there's no doubt
exactly.
that happens. But what
Yes.
we have seen in that research around sibling sexual abuse in particular is, as you were sort of saying before, the person who causes harm as a 13-year-old is not likely necessarily to do it in adulthood. And that person also deserves to live a full life and to have a, you know, and work through what they need to work through in terms of shame and guilt and understanding of their own behavior. I have spoken to a couple of people who caused harm. And of course, in the story portal at SiblingsToo.com, I get the stories. They don't understand themselves why they did what they did. And they feel terrible remorse for what they did. And they don't know what to do next, because like you said, if they go to social services, if they go somewhere here in this jurisdiction, it's sort of, it's mandatory reporting for if it's occurring to and with a child. But still, you know, to get somebody to sit in therapy and say, I caused sexual harm to my sibling, you know, that you might as well just pull the nose off their face when they're wide awake. You know, like it's going to be. And I remember hearing about somebody who was in therapy for a year before she disclosed that she had been abused by a brother for a full year. So it's sort of like, and the therapist friend of mine kind of went, I really wish you could have told me that like 10 months ago, because it explains so much of what there's been, this block to growth here. And now we know what it is. And but it took somebody a year to disclose that,
Yeah,
because of
and it
all the
can take
shame and
longer
stigma.
as well. It can take longer as
Oh
well.
yeah.
I remember a mother. that her daughter was abused as a child by an adult. But when we finished the therapy with with her child, she said, you know, I need to say this. I
Mm,
was abused by my siblings when I
mm,
was little, you know, and it was as soon as her daughter was okay, she was ready to tell her own truth as well,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And so there is a lot of secrecy, which is we know as some of, you know, the traumatogenic things that you know, Finkelhor has described as well, about the impact that this can have in the survivors as well.
yeah,
And I would say, if 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 I had, you know, an accident and I have crushed someone else, you know, by driving a car when
yeah,
I'm 12, I shouldn't be driving that car because I'm 12, but I was allowed to drive that car. Why? You know, but as
yeah,
well, I crushed someone and I crushed the person and left that person badly hurt. Will I be able to erase that? I
yeah,
cannot. I
no,
can learn to live with that. But the idea is I can live with that and trying to not repeat that and trying to do a more kind of fulfilled life as much as I can, you know, with the experience that I have had that have shifted my trajectory of life. And if a child was abused when the child was 7 and it was sexually raped when he was 7, and then when he was 14, he raped another child being 7,
mm,
in the same way that this young person was raped, in the same way, exactly the same way, that tells you something about the
no,
impact of
yeah,
the rape, but also as you can tell, the victims are not really well. I mean, usually the victims, as some women as well, they will go to more the depressed side of the situation because this is a
mhm,
gender issue as well. This is more in
yeah,
men than
yeah,
in women,
yeah,
and well, the LGBT community is not really well represented yet there in
yeah,
this, you
yeah,
know, in the research as
yeah,
well. And but also in men, you can know as well that they will acting out easily because they don't have this capacity to connect with the thoughts
yeah,
or the thinking or their emotions. So
yeah,
there's something that's a gender issue here that we cannot deny, that is a part of the comprehensive approach that we need to have in terms of the society issue, the family issues, and the young
yeah. That
people's mind issue.
that triangular model and approach and everything is what I love about it too. What you've said is in the developing of the model, the voices from those involved and impacted was fundamental to the development, fundamental to the understanding. And we know that, you know, quite often models are developed from research, and then a model is developed and then it's applied, and then maybe there'll be some feedback. And I'm speaking in general terms here, but to sort of sit back and actively seek lived experience insight as a model is being developed, I think makes it a extremely valid from the get-go, because you're learning, you're hypothesizing, you're creating a piece, you're implementing, you're getting feedback, you're tweaking that piece, you're getting more information, you're expanding on the model, and it's mutually informed from,
Exactly.
you know, you're a psychologist, so there's an understanding of the brain, how it works, emotional regulation, all of these sorts of things that the general public doesn't have. So you
Mhm.
bring that education, for example, and your colleagues and peers bring that education and marry it up to lived experience. And
Exactly.
both of you sit down and make sense of, you make sense of A in the context of B, and you make sense of B in the context of A, if I'm
Yeah.
sort of saying that correctly. And
But
then you
also we
created
realize,
this model.
yes, but also we realize as well that there can be a lot of secrecy from the family as well.
Oh,
That
sure.
is really ashamed. of the situation. And we needed to work with the parents to allow the children to tell as well, because some children have the prohibition of their families to tell, because this was like it's a stigma for the family.
Yeah.
So some of them were silenced by the adults, who were saying, don't tell anything, and that's not helpful for the young people or the children as well. No, that's not helpful at all. We also saw differences between the girls that display this kind of behavior than the boys, and the attachment issues involved within the relational situation inside of the family. For example, adults disconnected from their children, which has an impact on the sexuality. I have told you before as well as the dynamic maturation model of Patricia Crittenden that started with Bowie, Mary Ainsworth, and then continued to be developed as well, has some reflections about psychopathology and how it can appear some problems in terms of the sexuality as the attachment has kind of similar ways of connect, like proximity, kisses, hugs, and whatever, with the distinction of, the sexual organs as well, that will be displayed more in the sexuality as well. But there's an impact of rivalry within siblings as well, the sibling that is loved and receive the hugs and the kisses and that is praised, and the sibling that is not being seen as well at all, and is left in his room with devices by themselves, without reflecting, without any mirroring or person that will help them to progress in terms of their developmental needs, and the develop of the brain as well in terms of crisis periods where the brain will be developing certain ways, And if you are left in your affectivity by yourself, that is really something that then what else? What other stimulation but to self-touch, for example, But we need to connect. We need the other to progress in life and affectivity.
If there's one thing that one quote unquote good thing that came out of the pandemic, it was an understanding that people need that connection with other people. And if they don't have it, they suffer in one form or another. And then we extrapolate that out to children. And I know we talk about it in terms of mental health of children, and we did during the pandemic, that they weren't getting their connection with their classmates and, because they couldn't go to school and things like that. Well, now if you just take that to another level, and you take what we already saw very blatantly in society, in the media, about people needing to attach or be connected, to other people, and then you sort of bring that into this conversation, it becomes easier, I think, for parents and for society to see how vulnerable children are and how the context within which they're trying to figure out their world can be a significant influence on their behaviors, good, bad, and ugly, and therefore then, without doing this in a way of pointing fingers, it then becomes more acceptable to say, I, as a parent, might have screwed something up here, but parents are notoriously bad for taking all the guilt anyway. But your kid steals a chocolate bar and you're guilty for years, but you know what I mean? But it becomes, I think, a little more, it becomes easier to say, this behavior that we don't like is happening in a context. Let's figure out what that context is. Then let's figure out how that context impacts the kid. And then let's deal with it from that perspective. I think when, having these sorts of conversations like the one that you and I are having now, I think helps people to see that we don't have to look at a child who had a type of behavior that we don't like as being just a monster. Like, that's too black and white. There's too much else going on. Some are, let's be real. Some, but it's such a small percentage.
Yeah, but that percentage, even that percentage, for a child that Jorge Barudi, which is a really well-known, author in our country and well-loved psychiatrist as well, and he usually said, it is a really kind of a cowardly adult to think that a little child displayed such horrible behavior, like with psychopathology included as well, the ones that do really terrible things,
Yeah.
for such a small person to be doing such a terrible things, like it can be biological things involved, but also a lot of traumatic experience going on that we know now that people that display that type of psychopathology
Mhm.
will have suffered in horrible ways that they disconnect, so they don't care anymore. So empathy
Yeah.
is something that can be developed. So the question will be why they didn't develop. So even in that little amount of young person that will think they are really horrible and they are responsible and they are really horrible, there was some more horrible things that support that behavior, thinking that they are so little that they are displaying these horrible things already. So we need to question ourselves and our responsibility as adults and as a people that will build this society. We have done things. And the thing is that not to blame and blame and blame, but to do some things like the things that you're doing for all of us to raise awareness.
The thing I often say to people, I personally don't like the word fault. It's somebody's fault. I do hold people responsible for stuff, but when I am willing to accept responsibility myself in my day to day, in the way I communicate with my husband or, the family or whatever, I'm willing to accept responsibility. When I think when a person can take responsibility for what they do, and we're not talking about significant mental health concerns, for example, or a schizophrenic or, these sorts of things, but in the general day to day, I know for myself, when I became willing to accept responsibility for who I am and what I do on a day to day basis, so much of my life opened up. And I think if society and families are willing to accept their level of responsibility here, as are the people inside, then, and not point fingers or use the word blame, but just say, oh, responsibility lies here and probably there, there, and there as well. Let's look to how we can improve those things and do that in that quintessential adult way that we're supposed to be able to do adult things.
Exactly.
Then maybe, maybe there's some hope there. But I do believe that when you have a model like the one you were referring to, that is mutually created by those impacted and by the people such as yourself who know the science. When you put those two groups together, like I try and do on the Awareness Day, for example, lived experience, academics and professionals, you're then actually creating that broad conversation that we need to have. And can contribute to the prevention of SSA from occurring in the first place, or really powerful and important intervention when it does.
I think that what I would like to left you as the phrase that I would like the people to get from this conversation that we had right now is like the name of our model as well, which is a sharing responsibility model. Let's share the responsibility. Let's share it because they're growing. Let's share it. It is correct to try to share it.
Paula, I think that is an amazing place to wrap up our interview today and our conversation, that the notion of shared responsibility across those dimensions with an openness and not being cowardly, as your quote was alluding to, is really where this whole journey needs to go. And as we continue to do awareness days and have international connections and all of that sort of stuff, and society becomes more able to have these conversations, I think the opportunities for shared responsibility will open up.
Right.
Thank you so much today,
Thank
Paula, for your
you.
time and
Thank
energy.
you. Thank you. Thank you.